This is the English language section of Free Radio Europe from Strasburg, the European Parliament. Good evening. Yours and my guest tonight is David McAllister, a German politician, member of the European Parliament, but also chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and deputy leader of the EPP. Previously the mayor of his hometown and minister president of Lower Saxony. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure.
David McAllister, fine German name.
Yes, well, in the 21st century, perhaps a more common German name than in the last century.
Please tell us about your family. It's fascinating.
Well, I'm the product of Anglo-German love and friendship thanks to the presence of the British military in Germany. My father participated in the Second World War on the British side and returned to Germany later on as a civil servant with the British military. And as many of his comrades and colleagues, they married German wives.
Sure.
And so I have a British father from Scotland, German mother, and I have both passports.
Sure. But you chose to serve in the Bundeswehr.
I grew up in West Berlin, where my father was stationed until 1982, so I went to the British school in Berlin-Charlottenburg near the Olympic Stadium. But then my parents moved from West Berlin to a small town in northern Germany, and I noticed that eventually I turned German, and for me it was nothing special to, of course, do my military service in the Bundeswehr after leaving school in 1989.
Sure. This is a sad session, isn't it? Because it's the last one in which the British will be participating as members.
Well, it's very sad. You will have the same feelings as I do. We deeply regret that the UK is leaving the European Union and that our British colleagues, 73, are leading the European Parliament. Most of our British colleagues were highly respected across party lines, perhaps with the exception of the members of the Brexit party who weren't that active in the committee work because they never really were interested in this.
But very active at denouncing whatever was happening.
Well, they were active at that, it's correct, and in the plenary they had their big statements, but Labour colleagues, Conservative colleagues, Lib Dems, SNP Greens, I mean, we had really great British colleagues here in the Parliament, and this place will be different without them, that's for sure.
You will be one of the few British citizens still serving in the European Parliament.
Yes, I know that.
But not the only one.
No, not the only one. I think there are a few others. And this small group of MEPs from the EU 27 with dual citizenships should actually also try and be a bridge between the UK and the European Parliament, because whatever happens, the UK will remain for us an important partner and ally.
Could we have done something different to prevent Brexit? Because at the cutting edge, it was the issue of the movement of people, wasn't it?
Well, I believe Brexit is a historic mistake with severe consequences for both sides.
But what do you say to the British argument that if Cameron was given a special deal on reducing the rights of settlement for EU citizens in Britain, then the referendum might have gone differently. And it was the Polish contingent, which numbered up to 1 million at the peak, which came to Britain when Tony Blair, unlike Germany in fact,
yes,
didn't exercise the derogation on the free movement of labour. That created tensions in some small British towns, huh?
Yeah, but I remember exactly what was happening in the beginning of 2016. These were very complex negotiations, and I remember that the 27 member states went as far as possible offering David Cameron...
Well, within the treaties.
Within the treaties, but they
Couldn't we have changed the treaty?
Well, there was not much appetite for changing treaties. I mean, looking back now, we might have decided something differently. But I remember that for some Eastern European countries, we were going as far as possible, and we made David Cameron, from my point of view, an attractive offer. But not for a single moment was he able to sell this to the British people. Because before he even was able to present the details, the public opinion was he went to Brussels, he didn't ask for much, and he got even less, forget it. And that's why many European leaders and many MEPs, including me, we were actually a bit disappointed that what was on substance didn't play a real role in the campaign.
Because if you spend 20 years denouncing the European Union and suddenly you turn around and start saying, no, let's remain, your credibility is not very high.
Well, exactly, and the European Union, that's not only the EU institutions, the European Union, these are the 28 or now 27 member states, and we all are sitting in the same boat. And this play, this blame game didn't work, that any political success was always national British,
Yeah.
and every failure was always European.
That's not a mechanism peculiar to Britain. Most politicians from most countries do that. They try to come to sensible agreements here, and then they go home and they announce a big victory against the Brussels bureaucrats.
Exactly, but I think the British were the best at that. They had developed the best technique.
But as a result, we have a situation which, to my mind, resembles a little bit that of 1807.
1807?
Under Napoleon, the entire continent of Europe under one authority, except for Russia and England.
Oh, I haven't seen these parallels between 2020 and 1807. I'll have to look at my history book.
Well, we adopted your report today on the state of Europe's foreign policy. Are you pleased with the amendments?
Yes, well, my report got a broad majority. It's good to see that the majority of political groups are supporting our general line. This was my third annual report on the CFSP, and we have outlined our expectations as a parliament for the new High Representative Josep Borrell, and we have also made a few concrete recommendations how to move forward. I believe that the European Union needs to become more active on the global stage. Our foreign policy needs to become more effective, and the European Parliament, at least the large majority of the European Parliament, is interested in playing a constructive role. This was also the essence of the debate yesterday night.
Your report, and you personally support Ursula von der Leyen's vision of creating a European defense capability worthy of its name, a defense union within 5 years. What's your definition of a defense union worthy of its name?
First of all, I welcome that Ursula von der Leyen wants to make the European Union a stronger and
you are colleagues from Germany, aren't you?
A more active actor on the global stage. I know Ursula von der Leyen for nearly 20 years. We come from the same region, Lower Saxony in Germany, and we started our political careers together 20 years ago. Ursula von der Leyen has described her new commission as geopolitical commission. So after the political commission of Jean-Claude Juncker in 2014 to 2019, we now have a geopolitical commission. This is a big name. And of course, there are some expectations. I welcome very much that she has decided that every Wednesday at the commission meeting, the High Representative has to report about current affairs on a global stage. And the High Representative Josep Borrell has many, many things to do, including a new EU-China strategy, a new EU-Africa strategy. He's supposed to focus together with the other commissioners on the developments in the Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership. So many, many things where I think we can take the European Union to a new level. The fully fledged defense union was already a project from the Juncker Commission. Ursula von der Leyen is continuing this project.
We'll have a budget for the first time, yeah, a defense budget.
Yes, well, the three main pillars of our common security and defense policy are the permanent structured cooperation, the European Defense Fund, and the military mobility. And these are three important pillars where we as Europeans need to get our act together. The European Union has always been a soft power, and it will remain a soft power, but we need to develop some hard power capabilities, some hard power capacities to become a credible actor on the global stage. Or as Jean-Claude Juncker said, using a German word, the European Union needs to learn Weltpolitikfähigkeit, needs to learn the ability to actually act on the global stage. When it comes to trade, we are a global power. When it comes to foreign policy, we are not a global power.
Okay, well, that's the aspiration, but let's look at the reality. The Lisbon Treaty already says that we've pledged ourselves in the treaty to loyally support the President of the Council and the High Rep in foreign policy. But the reality is that countries like France and Germany, on anything that's important, relations with Russia, relations with Ukraine, relations with Iran, relations with China, relations with the United States, freelance on their own.
Well, in your time as Foreign Minister, you experienced what it's like at these EU Foreign Affairs Council meetings. You have the small and medium-sized countries who are seriously interested in coordinating European foreign policy more closely. And then you have the larger countries who have their own capacities, their own capabilities, who might not be so dependent on actually strengthening the High Representative. And still I believe that all member states of the European Union are small countries
but Germany,
on a global level.
thanks to Brexit, is becoming a bigger shareholder in this business, from about 20% to about 25%. And if Germany continues to run its own foreign policy in breach of the treaty, sooner or later the smaller countries you mentioned will start balancing Germany.
Yeah, but I think, of course, Germany is also to be criticized, fair enough, but I would still say that Germany plays a much more constructive role in actually supporting a common foreign policy. The German government, Chancellor Merkel, has made some very concrete proposals how we could improve our operations. For instance, introducing qualified majority voting in the council.
You argue for that in your report, but I'm sure you see how controversial this is. I mean, in Poland, for example, they think, well, we want our veto power, because it's so nice to be able to veto and then expect others to come running to you and beg you to change your mind.
I understand that this is a major step forward and that there are many discussions, especially in Eastern European countries and certain Eastern European countries, about the fear of losing national sovereignty. Perhaps we could go small steps and start to introduce or actually use qualified majority voting on certain fields. I'll give you one example, sanctions. I witnessed at a Foreign Affairs Council meeting where I was invited that the European Union was not able to take a united position on Venezuela because there are two, and in the end one country, which was blocking a joint position on the sanctions. I mean, if these kind of things happen, no wonder the European Union...
I use a different example to persuade our nationalists. About a month ago, Turkey blocked the updating of contingency plans for the defense of the eastern flank because it was unhappy with our position on the Kurds.
See.
Do you really want to be subject to that kind of veto?
Well, exactly. This is, of course, now a NATO case where Turkey doesn't play a constructive role, but there are many other cases I've seen here at an EU level. So Germany is trying to play a constructive role. But I do agree, Radosław, that if we want to really move forward, we need to get our act together, and in the end, all the member states will have to take bolder decisions than now, and perhaps not only talk about strengthening the European foreign policy on a Sunday, but actually starting to implement something they said on Sunday on Monday mornings.
If you look around Europe's borders today, what do you regard as either the biggest or the most urgent threat to our security?
Well, 10 years ago, we had a wonderful situation in Europe. We were strengthening the European Union, we were growing together.
End of history.
And in our
eternal
neighborhood,
peace.
southern neighborhood, eastern neighborhood, all things seem to go quite well. And 10 years later, we are in a deep mess. If you look to the south, I would say the most urgent problem is Libya. I very much welcome that the federal government in Germany, supported by the High Representative and others, is organizing this Berlin conference because we really need a last chance, a last attempt to bring the two opposing forces in Libya.
The Turks are considering sending forces. The Russians have already sent forces. If hostile forces capture Libya with its resources and its ability to turn off the valve with mass refugee movements, we're really in trouble, aren't we?
We are really in trouble. This is directly in our immediate neighborhood. Germany is not an active player in this conflict, so perhaps Germany has the larger credibility to actually bring all sides involved at the table. One thing must be clear, all forces who are actively, directly or indirectly involved in this conflict really have to contribute now to a sustainable solution, that we have a ceasefire, a truce, and then peace, and then we can start reconstructing this country. So that's the one point. The second point, if you go further to the southeast, of course the Middle East is always on our mind. We all have followed the worrying developments in Iran and Iraq. We had a debate in the European Parliament yesterday. You were active, I were active.
And we all worried about what Iran will do in response to the assassination of General Soleimani. But it looks like President Trump successfully threatened them with what experts called escalation domination, and it looks like he's won this round.
Well, we'll wait and see what actually happens. You never know with the Iranians. They are a very dangerous, vicious regime. The tragic downing of the plane might have an impact on the regime in Tehran, that they now for the first time are really seeing large mass protest and demonstrations.
Over
against
1,000 people have already
policies.
been murdered in the last few weeks, right?
And we have to be very clear, not only as a United States, but also as a European Union, don't kill protesters, don't execute people. These people are on the streets, they are demonstrating against the regime because they want a better Iran for themselves and their families. So the European Union can play a special role in solving the Iraq-Iran problem, let me call it this way, the crisis. We perhaps have diplomatic channels which are still open for us. What we need in the end is a kind of a security mechanism for the whole region where we can bring together Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Russians, the Americans, the Turks and others, because we need to de-escalate the situation, we need to lower the tensions. We all were concerned that we might have been at the brink of a regional war in the last 2 or 3 weeks.
I'm still concerned that it's the Iranians who provoke the United States, because desperate regimes do desperate things. If they think, and it's about 15 people in Tehran who take all the decisions, if they think their regime is about to fall, they might roll the dice and broaden the conflict.
I follow in the public debate in Europe, at least in some member states, there's always a lot of understanding for Iran and yes, we don't have to be so tough and so on. Let's be very clear, Iran has played a very destructive role.
And it's the nature of the regime, isn't it? It's the 20th century third utopia, theocracy.
Yes, and what I criticize is not only the human rights situation in Iran, but the destructive role they have played in Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon. They are also responsible for these civil war activities, for all the atrocities. And let me also add, as a German Christian Democrat, I can never accept a political regime that threatens to delete an independent state of Israel. Never ever will we Germans allow this to happen.
Today in the European Parliament, in the chamber next door, we also had a debate about what Mr. Putin has started saying about the origins of the Second World War. We thought we had it behind us when President Putin came to Gdańsk on the 70th anniversary of the Second World War, and together with Chancellor Merkel and other leaders recognized that that's where the war started. He was actually the first leader of Russia to come to Katyn, which was the other big Soviet lie about the Second World War. And now suddenly he's saying that Poland started the war, which I recall was the position of Adolf Hitler, that Poles attacked the German radio station at Gleiwitz, and that the Wehrmacht was just responding with defensive measures. Does the president of Russia really want to be speaking in the same voice with that particular Chancellor of Germany?
Well, this version of history that apparently Poland started the Second World War and Germans were reacting to provocations, I have only heard from extreme far-right people in Germany, reactionary people who still don't understand any lesson history has taught us. So I have absolutely no understanding for this kind of version, and it's rather astonishing that now you have these attempts in Moscow trying to rewrite history where we actually thought that we had really got our sheet of facts correct.
We thought we were on a convergence path with Russia, but you must see that this makes us in Central Europe disquieted, because when President Putin says the Soviet Union was right to do what it did, what we are hearing is we might do it again.
Well, since I've joined the European Parliament since 2014, I have really the unique opportunity to spend a lot of time also with Eastern European colleagues and across party lines, I have learnt much more these last 5 years how great your concerns and worries are. And history has shown, and you all were victims of the Soviet Union policy, that you know your neighbors better than we do, and that there must always be a solidarity between West and Eastern Europeans within the framework of EU and NATO, that we are at your side, and that we will not accept any kind of violation of international law and violation of the territorial integrity of countries. That's why I strongly believe that we also have to be very clear on Ukraine, because the illegal annexation of Crimea is more than just the annexation of
No, it's breaking
an
of a
island.
taboo.
It's the breaking of a taboo. It is the first change of international borders by force since 1945.
And on the same pretext of protecting your compatriots.
Yes, and we know that there are Russian-speaking citizens in certain EU member states.
And most of them don't want to be liberated.
Yes, for good reasons they don't want to. Actually, one of the most moving visits I had the last few years was when I visited the Bundeswehr-led NATO unit in Lithuania, because Germany is now showing solidarity with the Baltics, with Poland, together with the Americans, the Canadians, the Brits and others. And we enjoyed our solidarity. We enjoyed solidarity for so many decades, and that it really is now time that Germany can also give something back to allies and close friends and neighbors. And that's why I strongly believe in German-Polish friendship and cooperation. And I do hope that on a national level, the relations between Warsaw and Berlin can even improve more, to put it diplomatically.
Under Minister von der Leyen, Minister of Defense, during maneuvers, a Polish general commanded a German tank battalion, and a German general commanded a Polish tank battalion, and there were Leopards on both sides.
And this is a fantastic development. Who would have thought this would have been possible 20, 25 years ago? And by the way, this was also possible because there were courageous politicians in Warsaw who went these steps forward, and one of them I'm just talking to.
Oh, thank you. But I think it shows above all that reconciliation can only happen when we agree the facts of history. And let's just hope that Russia understands that lesson too.
Yes, and I think that the interpretation of history should be really something historians should deal with and not politicians. And I think what happened from 1933 to 1945, the facts are 100% clear, and we should stop reinterpreting these facts.
David, congratulations again on your report. Looking forward to working with you in the Foreign Affairs Committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And thank you for your attention.